We are now in the last reading segment of this novel, part 3, chapters 2 to the end of the novel. Our priest has gone with the mestizo, crossed over the border back into the country where he's a wanted man, a marked man, and he's come to a village of Indian huts, and it's deserted. There's no movement. And the priest knows what's going to happen. And knows that they're not going to need the mules anymore because, well, he knows where he's going. And he's not going to think about escape anymore. Remember early in the novel, he was praying to be caught, even though he was fleeing the police. The priest starts down the path. It's rocky, it's hilly. The half-caste mestizo is panting and whining and complaining about the trip. And the priest is thinking that it's too bad that the mestizo sin is so huge. And he's not strong enough for that sin. And he's not strong enough for this journey. He's lagging behind. He's like a whining child. And he conceals when the priest says, I get still that they will let me see the American. And the mestizo is continuing this charade of deceit. He says, who's they? We know who they is. And so they leave everything behind. The bottles of brandy are clinking. And he's wondering, the priest is, how soon the police will appear. They're very well hidden. A storm is coming up. And that is always indication, as we've said before, of trouble coming. The priest is nervous. He knows he's walking into a trap. If it hadn't been for that letter, he would have doubted the very existence of the American. And if he hadn't seen the dead child too, of course. So he walks to where he should be and walks into one of the huts. Mestizo looks a little frightened, but because we're approaching the climax, it's not much of a climax, and he sees the American there, who's in a great deal of pain that alters his face. And he doesn't look as superhuman now. He looks more like a tramp because pain has changed his face. The priest kneels down, puts his face near the man's mouth. He's about to give him the last rites. And it's going to take a while. And the American says, beat it, Father. Get out of here. And the priest says, now you better hurry and do your confession. You don't have long. How long is it since you went to confession? The American says, 10 years. What are you doing here? Well, you asked for a priest. And the American says, you got to beat it, Father, because the American knows this is a trap. So the priest gets angry with him. I've traveled for 5 hours to get here, and this is all you give me. And it seems horribly unfair to him. Well, the American says, don't trouble about me, I'm through. Do you want to confess? The American doesn't want to confess. The priest says, look, God has given you this one chance. What sort of life have you led these years? Does it seem so grand now? But the American says, take my gun, as if the priest is going to need it. But there is no gun. It's been taken away. It's not there. The holster is empty. It's very hot in that hut. And there's a storm coming. A Christian could believe that the soul did the same, held absolution and peace at the final moment. After a lifetime of the most hideous crime, or sometimes pious men died suddenly. And there's no repentance here. So the priest does do the ceremony of last rites, whispers the words of conditional absolution, and hoping that the spirit has repented. But he prays without conviction. And he feels he's a criminal just like this criminal. And we are now in chapter 3. And no sooner does he finish than the lieutenant steps in and says, well, have you finished now? And he has. And he thanks the lieutenant, the priest does, for letting me stay alone with him. The lieutenant says, I'm not a barbarian. But the priest says, I've had enough of escaping. Lieutenant didn't think the priest would come back. But the priest says, well, even a coward has a sense of duty. Are you going to shoot me now again The lieutenant says, I'm not a barbarian. You'll be tried properly for treason. Yeah. The priest reminds the lieutenant, you've seen me twice before. And so the two of the men are in the hut with the dead American. Soldier lights a candle. And the lieutenant says, so you have a child? And the priest says, yes, but not all of the priests are like me. I'm just a bad priest. And we know that he doesn't think highly of himself. He reminds the lieutenant that in prison, you gave me money, you paid my fine. Lieutenant's a little jumpy, says, keep your hand away from your pockets. But the priest just says, I have a pack of cards. I just do card tricks like I used to do at the parish fairs. One's called Fly Away Jack, which is symbolic because right now the priest wishes he could fly away and get out of this trap that he's now been caught in. And the lieutenant remembers those parish fairs. Remember, he had a miserable childhood. He believes that the priests are oppressive. They take the money from the poor peasants and they live in luxury and ease. He talks to the lieutenant, and really here we have the encounter between the protagonist and the antagonist. And really we are seeing how the priest's very presence, not his example, not anything he preaches, changes people for the better. And we're going to see that happen rapidly in this part of the book. The lieutenant says he has nothing against the priest as a man. The priest points out, you're against God. The lieutenant says, it's your ideas. You're cunning. What have you ever done for this country? The priest thinks, on Wednesday I'll be dead. But the lieutenant's faith is to give them people food, to teach them to read, to give them books, and see that they don't suffer. Are the priest's God and the lieutenant's faith really that much different? But suffering happens. Death is a fact. Oddly enough, the priest says, we agree about a lot. We have facts too. But he says, the world is going to be unhappy whether you're rich or poor. And a little pain you shouldn't bother about. The priest says, I'm not a saint and I am not brave. He wants to go on talking. But he says to the lieutenant, it's no good you're working for your end unless you're a good man yourself, and there won't be good men in your party. Then you'll have all the old starvation, beating, get rich anyhow. But it doesn't matter so much my being a coward. I can put God into a man's mouth just the same, and I can give him God's pardon. So who's got the power? The lieutenant or the priest? The priest has a kind of power too. Now, they talk some more. The priest says, it was when he left I began to go to pieces. I got careless about my duties. I began to drink. Pride was at work. Pride's the worst of all. Remember, in the 7 deadly sins, that pride is the worst one. One day I got drunk and I was lonely and I had an affair and I had a child. Got a child. I'm not a martyr. Lieutenant said, well, okay, you've talked a lot. And the priest says, well, you've listened very patiently. And the lieutenant says, I'm not afraid of other people's ideas. The mestizo says that the priest is a good man. But he asks the priest for a blessing. The priest says, I'm not going to give you a blessing because God knows what you did, and my blessing isn't going to undo that or make it lesser. So he says, I will pray for you. They're now riding back toward the town the priest will be shot in. And the lieutenant says, well, you're a man of education. The priest says, yes, I've had schooling. I've had to think a lot of things out for myself. The lieutenant is angry because the people he shot were his own people. He wanted to give them the whole world. Sounds a little bit like Jesus wanted to give us the whole world. You hate the rich and love the poor. Pain's a good thing at the end of a gun. Oddly enough, they sound like they're speaking the same ideas. Each one wants to give something good to people. I just want justice, that's all. So they ride into the town. It's no triumphal procession. The priest rides with a weak grin on his face. The lieutenant says, I guess you're hoping for a miracle. Priest says, no, I'm no good to anyone anymore, so why should God keep me alive? And then the lieutenant says, can I do anything for you? Surprise. Priest says, give me permission to confess. Go to Padre Jose, ask him to hear my confession. Remember, a priest can only confess to another priest. There's no saint around here. They come to the cemetery. The lieutenant says he will do this. So, notice, the priest is changing people for the better just by his presence, even though he's not a hero or a martyr or very dutiful or he's got a drinking problem. He's changing people. He's changing the lieutenant. The lieutenant is about to do him this favor. They go by the cemetery, symbol of death. And we're in chapter 4. The lieutenant doesn't want to send another man to see Padre Jose and doesn't want anybody to know, even his superior, that a religious ceremony is going to happen in the prison. He can feel himself being watched by a bunch of kids, but he's going to keep his word, and he decides to go see Padre Jose. Well, Padre Jose is there, and as usual, being ridiculed by the little kids next door, and he's about to be ridiculed by his wife. I want you to come up to the police station, the lieutenant says, but Padre Jose thinks he's about to be arrested. The lieutenant says, that's not what it's for. There's a priest in the jail, and he wants to confess. Well, Padre Jose says, this is against the law. And the lieutenant says, don't worry about that. Well, his wife, Padre Jose's wife, is very nasty, and she says, no, you're just trying to trick him. He's a pensioner of the government. And that priest is a drunk. Padre Jose says, poor man. And the woman's yelling at him. Nobody's going to know. The kids will know. There'll be no end to it. Jose says, it's my duty. You aren't a priest anymore. That's your duty now, she says. But Jose stands up for himself and he says, it's only that, well, I am a priest. All right. And she ridicules him, cackles, laughs at him. Padre Jose won't do it. Tells the lieutenant, tell the man I will pray. That's all. Lieutenant goes back to the jail, says he won't come. And the priest has compassion. He says, poor man. There's going to be a trial, though the priest will not be present at it. Usually you're present at your own trial, but it wouldn't make any difference, the lieutenant says. And so the priest is about to spend the night before his execution alone. But he's got plenty to do. The priest says he's afraid of pain. The lieutenant says there's not much pain. It won't last long. But he does feel suspicious that the priest is trying to talk him around to his way of thinking. The only thing the priest is really concerned about here is he cannot absolve himself of sin. He needs another priest, and he's not going to get one. The lieutenant leaves his cell. And now the lieutenant has an epiphany, because it dawns on him that his reason for being and his reason for acting is gone. The weeks of hunting the priest, it says, were a happy time. But now there will be no priest to hunt, no priest to shoot. So what happens to the lieutenant's faith, if you want to call it that, when there's nobody to hunt or to kill? It's gone. Will he become useless? Tells the priest the pain won't go on for long. And so the priest is left alone in his cell for some kind of confession and some kind of repentance. He prays for his daughter. He wants God to help her, let her live forever. Prays for the half-caste, for the lieutenant, for Coral at the banana station. We don't know what happened to her. He feels this whole thing is a failure, but this is the best he can do. And he thought, if I hadn't been so useless, useless. People have died for me. They deserved a saint, but God didn't see fit to send them one. It's a night that's slower than the last he spent in prison. Talks aloud to himself. They had given a chance to Padre Jose, but they had never given him a chance at all. He has a strange dream. He's in a table in front of a high altar of a cathedral. There are dishes of food in front of him. He's eating ravenously. A priest is passing back and forth, saying Mass. The service is longer. The serving priest kneels, but he just sits there, paying no attention to God. He's just eating the food. And there's the child Coral from the banana station is serving him. And then the child says it's news and it's dawn. And at dawn is when executions usually happen. And he wakes up. He feels hope. He's trying to remember the prayer, the act of contrition. He's confused. He thinks, what an impossible fellow I am and how useless. I've done nothing for anybody, really. And might just as well have never lived. He felt only an immense disappointment because he had to go to God empty-handed with nothing at all. At the end, there was only one thing that counted: to be a saint. We're now in part 4, last chapter. And this is where we really start to see people be transformed, because we're at the banana station, and Mrs. Fellows, as usual, who's in love with her illnesses, is in bed behind her mosquito net and says her head is splitting, and Captain Fellows isn't paying too much attention to her. He's made a decision. He's not been talking much these days. And she notices this. And he says, we've got our own lives to lead. It's like they're children in a strange land, but Fellows is no longer a child. He announces that they've caught a priest and they're about to shoot him, and it was that man Coral kept at their plantation. Mrs. Fellows, however, is looking forward to returning to England and going back home. And then I'll be all right. I don't think she's ever going to be all right, no matter where she is. But Captain Fellows suddenly and harshly says, I'm not going back. He's not going back to England. I'm staying. And she says, well, it would kill me to stay. And he says, you don't have to stay. You don't mind running away and leaving her. What's happened? Remember Coral at the banana loading, feeling a pain in her stomach? She's died. His one child that he loved has died, and she's buried right there on that plantation. And he's decided he's going to stay with her. He's not going back, and he's not going to leave her alone. He's going to stay on that plantation. And he can let his hypochondriac wife go back. That's his decision. A transformation. He's thinking of the priest. And Mrs. Fellows says, you promise. But he's not going back. He's going to stay. Now we're in Mr. Tench's office. He's got the chief of police in the chair. And he's going to inflict some pain on him by working on his teeth. Remember, there's no anesthetic. And he lays out his metal tools. And there's a window outside in his office. And it turns out Mr. Tench has gotten a letter from his wife, who's gotten religion, and she has forgiven him and wants to make things legal, so they're going to get a divorce. Transformation, Mr. Tench has not gone back. Things are finalized. He's not going to be living in a limbo anymore. The chief of police's teeth are really rotten, and the chief of police is corrupt. So, yeah, he's a rotten guy in two ways. But outside the window, down there in the courtyard, Mr. Tench goes to the window and sees a man about to be shot. And he's fascinated by this. A small man comes out. It's our priest. Held up by two policemen. It's not anything heroic. The little man makes some kind of movements with his arms, like he's trying to say something. And then there's a crash of rifles. And there's a single shot. In a firing squad execution, the firing squad shoots the person, but it's the officer commanding the firing squad who has to go up to the body and shoot the body in the head. And one officer does that. Meanwhile, while this is going on, the chief of police is in the dental chair going, "Oh, the pain, the pain." Well, it's symbolic. The priest down there on the ground is feeling some pain too before he dies. He remembers that this is the priest that got up out of his office to go help the child whose mother was dying. This time, Tench says he's going to clear out. There was no grave, there was nobody. An appalling sense of loneliness came over him, doubling him with indigestion. The little fellow had spoken English and knew about his children. He felt deserted. Mr. Tench has now been transformed. By the priest's example, he is going to leave this place that he's put off leaving forever. Now we're in the home of the little boy and the woman who's reading about Juan the Martyr. And Juan is just a wonderful martyr. He's about to be executed. He's preparing for this martyrdom, praying. He's calm. He's happy. Smiles at the chief of police as they lead him out to be shot. The kid wants the excitement of, let's get to the shooting. He wants to get to the shooting part. And Juan does not need to be bound. He's just going to stand there. He's got his prayer beads. And Juan is a wonderful martyr. And he has a smile of adoration and happiness. He will see the arms of God soon. And the soldiers raise their rifles, and just before they fire, Juan cries out, "Hail Christ the King!" Perfect martyr. He's shot, he dies, and he dies in holy martyrdom. The men go up and soak their blood, the handkerchief in the blood, and they're going to cut it up for relics. So the kid, Juan, asks, "Well, what about this priest they shot today? Was he a hero?" And the mother dutifully answered, "He was one of the martyrs of the church." Remember, our priest didn't think he was a martyr. He may be one of the saints. Remember, our priest didn't think he was a saint. And his mother says, he was one of the heroes of the faith. So the priest has given her something. He's a martyr. He's a saint. He's a hero. Okay. And maybe the mother can get a relic. Well, I don't think there's too many relics for this priest. Well, the kid's pretty impressed that they had a hero and a saint in their house, but now there are no more heroes and there are no more priests. It's over. And here comes the lieutenant walking down the street. And the kid is looking out the window at him and he sees his revolver. And this is the guy that the kid worshipped because he had a gun. But this time he spits at the lieutenant, and the spit lands on his holster. So he doesn't ascribe to the lieutenant's faith. The boy feels cheated and disappointed. It's like he's missed something. He wonders about the priest. And suddenly he hears a knock at the door. And he knows it's his duty to go to the door. He opens the door. There's a stranger there, a tall, pale, thin man with a sour mouth, with a small suitcase, who says, "If you would let me come in, I am a priest." The boy swings the door open, puts his lips to the man's hand, and kisses it. The boy has been transformed by our priest's example. Suddenly he has a belief in a religious faith. A Catholic religious faith. Now, I'm always speculating at the end of the novel who this man is. Is it Padre Jose, who's decided to go back to the priesthood? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know if there's any evidence for that. But look at the other side of it. The attempt of the lieutenant to eradicate religion from people's lives because it was so oppressive has failed. Because here's another priest. And he will keep that faith alive for people. And he will do the ceremonies in secret that they want to have done. Don't forget that under the Roman Empire, the Christians were down in the catacombs in hiding, doing what they needed to do because their religion was more or less outlawed. And the novel ends, and so does my teaching of literature. Hope you enjoyed this. Bye for now.